Welcome to Conversations in a Vintage Shop, a podcast from behind my counter between customers. Join me while I sit behind my retail counter and just have a conversation with you, or with myself. While I look out the window, observe what I see, things that are happening in the store today, throughout the week, and just fun little stories that I have from my time as a business owner. This is something that you find interesting, then keep listening, and I appreciate you. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me back here on Conversations in a Vintage Shop, a podcast where I bring all the conversations I have with my customers and friends in the shop to you. And on today's episode, I promised I was going to talk about my latest auction journey. And this one has been one I feel like decades in the making. And it's my latest win from Julien's auctions. Now, if you've been around and listened to the podcast for a while, you may remember a handful of episodes ago, I was talking about another recent auction that I participated in with Julien's, where I was bidding on items from the archive of Doris Raymond, who is my ultimate idol and the person that I looked up to when I opened up my vintage shop. And her reverence for fashion and history and how fashion is art is really what motivated me to open my shop and also bring to life my archive and all of the things that I've been collecting for decades. So if you listen to that episode, you'll have a little bit more insight on what I'm talking about here. But for those who haven't, I'll try to give an introduction to what Julien's auctions are and what they do and everything that happened to bring me where I am today and the pieces I won. So if that's something that interests you or even not, you really should listen, because these are pieces that are relevant to history. And I don't know what more to say. I'm so excited, and I apologize. You can probably hear my phone in the background. Well, I am just beyond excited. And for those of you who know me, you'll know why. So if you're interested, then keep listening. Now, I know I always sound like a broken record when I give this disclaimer every episode, but if you're just listening to this episode and haven't listened to any of the others, I record this podcast live in my shop during shop hours. So you will hear background noise like the music that I constantly turn up too loud. I know for some people that can be extremely distracting and annoying, and for that, I apologize. But that was just the theme of the shop, and that's what I do. So I thought I'd give just a brief introduction for anybody who has never heard of Julien's auctions, what exactly they are and what they do. Now, they were founded in 2003, and I'm not going to read over every little bit, but you have the really big auction houses. You have Christie's, you have Sotheby's, and you have Julien's. And when I think of Julien's, I think of film and entertainment memorabilia. They do auction off more than that, but anytime I've seen a celebrity who has passed or their estate goes up for sale, or anybody that collects any significant cultural memorabilia, they go to Julien's. So they've been on my radar for a very, very, very long time. And I would only ever hear about what was going up for sale. And they've had huge, huge auctions in their history. And probably one that maybe all of you have heard of the most is the one where, let me see what year it was. scroll back up. I'm reading their biography because I don't want to mess up any of the facts, but this was in 2016 when they had a huge auction of Marilyn Monroe's personal effects from her estate. And I believe these came from the estate of Lee Strasberg, who inherited all of Marilyn Monroe's estate after her death. I'm not positive on that, but I think generally that's where these pieces came from. And that was when her Happy Birthday, Mr. President Bob Mackie dress originally went up for auction, and it sold for $4.8 million to Ripley's Believe It or Not. And that came into relevance when Kim Kardashian wore the actual Marilyn Monroe dress to last year's Met Gala for the Costume Institute and caused a huge uproar because there was significant damage done to that dress. And I've actually had friends and customers who have gone and seen that piece in person after the gala and took pictures themselves, and there is damage, irreparable damage, really. And so that was brought into this whole realm of where did they get that dress? Got it from Julien's. They bought a lot of her estate, her makeup, a lot of clothes, but that was the most significant one. And I did an episode talking about that and why I never feel like it's okay for anyone to wear a garment like that has so much cultural and historical significance, especially when it was custom made for Marilyn Monroe. She was the last and only person to ever wear it. And I could go on a tangent. You want to hear more about that, let me know, and I can do an entire episode based on that. But other significant auctions they've done, in June of 2020, the guitar that Kurt Cobain used in Nirvana's famous MTV Unplugged New York sold for $6 million. In 2009, they sold Michael Jackson's signature white glove and his socks, and also the jacket he wore in his Thriller music video for $1.8 million. So they have a lot of heavy hitters. And even on the auction that I was on, the top seller was the white disco suit that John Travolta wore in the 1977 musical drama Saturday Night Fever. And that one, I can't remember off the top of my head what it sold for, but it sold for six figures easily. And then under that was the Iron Man mask that Robert Downey Jr. wore for Captain America's Civil War. So there was a mix of items in this auction. And this auction I was in, I should say, was titled Hollywood Contemporary or Classic and Contemporary. So you had a lot of memorabilia that was newer like that. And then you had pieces like what I bought that were vintage and classics. One of the first items auctioned off was Charlie Chaplin's original cane that he used in a lot of his silent films, and I believe that sold for $20,000. Again, this happened about a month ago, so my memory is a little fuzzy. But they had some of Marilyn Monroe's makeup, her receipts that she had for dresses and other things she had purchased. You had a big mix of pieces. And it was, if I had all the money in the world, I could have done even more damage. But for this auction, how I decided ahead of time what I was going to auction on is I am a member of the Julien Auctions bidding site. So myself as a bidder, I have to register ahead of time, send in paperwork, my ID proving that I am who I am, that I have the ability to pay for my items, because once sold, it's final. So they need to make sure that you're good for it. So there's stuff on the back end that you have to do for auctions like this to ensure that you're a legitimate and real bidder. And then to bid on the actual auction, you do have to register your bid. So just because you sign up to be a bidder, you still have to register your bid for every separate auction. But once you become kind of a member, I don't know if there's a better word to call it, but a repeat bidder or participator, you get sent the catalog ahead of time. So you can look through it if you want to do any early bidding, anything like that. You get the catalog ahead of time, which for this, I did. So I spent days just going through all of it, bookmarking exactly what I was interested in and narrowing it down, because my bidding mentality was that I have rankings of what I would like to get, starting from the top all the way down to where if I miss out on this one, I have other options and what I'm willing to bid and pay for it. So I try to get as organized as I can because they're very serious bidders. And since I'm not in Beverly Hills, which is where all of this takes place, I do the virtual auction. So that's another component where I'm not there. I don't get to see the people that are bidding against me. I have a live feed that shows the auctioneer and some of the items, and then I just see a screen. So I had to have a master plan, and I had one opportunity with the Doris Raymond auction to understand how the bidding process for that went, what it was like, what I had to look out for. But what I didn't anticipate with this one is that sometimes they call the final bid a lot faster. So you definitely were on your toes the entire time. But these auctions typically are always on a Saturday or Sunday, which, for those of you that know, I work all weekends. So I had to have my alarm set. I had to have all of my lists written out on what my plan of action was, because it started at, I believe it was 12 o'clock Central Standard Time for me here in North Dakota. And it was 10 a.m., I believe, Los Angeles time. So I really had to pay attention because 12 o'clock is fairly steady and busy in the shop. So I had to come up with some kind of plan ahead of time. And I'd mentioned that we got the catalog early and there was an option for early bidding. But I personally never like to do that. And the biggest reason is I find for early bidding, you end up paying more for the item than you normally would because you drive up the bid earlier. And I do have a little bit of a strategy in the online auction or bidding world. Sometimes it can be seen as kind of an asshole strategy where you swoop in and bid last minute instead of going through a bidding war. I know it can get very, very tough. Now, if I remember correctly, the amount of items in this auction, I believe, was at 800 and some individual items. So that's why they split these auctions up into 2 days. And I was very lucky this time that all of the items I was really trying for were all in the first day. They were all pretty spread out, but the ones that I wanted the most were earlier in the auction. So I knew if I won those items, then the rest I had on my list, I wasn't even going to try for because I didn't have the budget for it. And that also I didn't bid on things that I wasn't really excited about and miss out on the chance of getting what I really wanted because I spent all of my money. But at the same time, knowing when you should really just go for something so you can get it in case you get to the bigger item that you wanted and they upbid you and you can't afford it anyways. So really, it's a game of chance and strategy. And there have definitely been pieces that I have lost out on that I really, really wanted. And I'll tell you more about them as I talk about the actual items I won. But you have to just have a really good group of things that you want and rank them on what you're willing to spend and what you really, really want. And there were pieces from a specific entertainer that I remember back in junior high, I would tell my teachers that one day I would touch something that belonged to her. And it's been my goal since I was a kid to obtain anything from this individual. And when I finally did, it really was an experience. On the day of the actual auction, which was, again, a Saturday in April, one of the first Saturdays in April, if I remember correctly. Again, it was a beautiful day outside, so I knew I was going to get people in. But I thought, well, maybe it'll fall around the lunchtime where it normally starts to taper down a bit before we get another rush. So I had the live stream on, the sound up, so when I would do different projects in the shop, I could hear it. And wouldn't you know, the moment that the top item I was gunning for, or the top items from the individual I was gunning for, that's when people started coming in. And it wasn't just one or two people, it was a flood of people, almost as if it was everybody knew that I was desperately trying to win pieces from this particular part of the auction. So it really was a test of, again, strategy and luck, because obviously I'm not going to be on my computer bidding on stuff and ignoring people who come up to the counter or my customers. So I really I had to wing it. And one of the first items that I did win, I almost lost out on, because I had a group of teenagers in here who, they didn't purchase anything, but they were being extremely obnoxious, I guess is the best word for it. Very loud, kind of goofing around. And, you know, if you've ever worked at the mall, you get customers that, you know, are just trying to waste time and get a little bit too ahead of themselves and a little bit disrespectful of the shops they're in. And I remember thinking at that time, if they're the reason why I lose out on this auction, I am going to lose my shit. Because again, these were a group of kids that they made it clear that they weren't going to purchase anything. They were just hanging out, which is fine on other days. But this particular day, they were throwing things around and just being ridiculous. So I was about to go into code red of anger if I missed out on it. But luckily, I was able to, right at the last minute, snag the piece I wanted. And I tell you, I almost cried. I was holding back tears because of how excited I was. And I remember looking at the customers, and I think they could tell I got really excited about something. And I just remember thinking, fuck you, I won it. You didn't stop me from winning this item. I know that sounds like an asshole because I'm a business owner and my job is being here present for my customers, but this was seriously a once in a lifetime opportunity for me. And all the stars aligned to where I had things budgeted. I had everything working in my favor this time around. And I missed out the last time this individual's estate came up for sale. I missed out on all of it because I wasn't in the position to purchase any of these items. So I was really motivated. But it was an interesting process because all of the things I won were up for auction within the same 3-hour period. So I didn't have to stay on the auction as long as I normally would have. For the Doris Raymond auction, I was on the auction for 8 hours that Saturday because all of my items were so spaced out in the day that I just had to keep the live stream going and set reminders on my phone for when my items were coming up. And that was difficult because I would constantly be having to check back. It really felt like torture. And in that auction, my goal for that one was just, I wanted anything from Doris Raymond's archives. I didn't have a particular goal on what. I just wanted something, anything that she had owned. So I didn't really have a game plan for it. It was just whatever I could afford. And I was able to get 2 pieces, which I talk about on a previous episode. But with this one, I definitely had to go in with a plan in mind. Otherwise, I don't think I would have been as successful as I was. Even now, talking about what I won makes me a little shaky. Like, you might notice a little bit of wobbling in my voice because I don't think it's quite sunk in yet, the pieces that I won. And again, if you're not into Hollywood history or Broadway, these will mean nothing to you. So if you're a friend, See, this is how excited I am. I'm getting tongue-tied. If you're a fan of old Hollywood and film legends and Broadway and musicals, then you'll understand why I'm so excited. And I'm definitely one of those people that feel like clothing and fashion is art. When so much thought and effort goes into making it, especially for things worn on stage and screen, there are so many different elements that go into making those costumes and wardrobes. And who they're worn, who wears them. I mean, I've heard people describe pieces as still having the essence of the person wearing them and the stories. I mean, that's what I tell a lot of my customers when I purchase pieces and I'm able to get the actual history of the person behind it, where they wore it, what they did with it. And I love passing that on because I feel like that makes clothing and fashion come alive and show it's not just a garment. Clothing wasn't created just for looks. It was created for a function and for a purpose, and has evolved into, okay, well, if you're in a place where you have to wear clothes, well, you might as well wear clothes that you love and look good and mean something. So that's why pieces like this just hold so much to me, because they're holding memories of the original owners and my memories growing up watching them. So now, who exactly am I talking about? What did I win? I've been pretty vague when talking about this because I just wanted to make sure that everything was finalized and I got the paperwork, because you just never know. And there have been some people where I've shown what I've won to, not that many. So I'm going to start working my way up to what I wanted the most. And the item that I had on my list that if I got, it'd be amazing, but if I didn't, I wouldn't be completely heartbroken because I've gotten everything else I wanted, is I think the one that's going to be the most popular. And that is this amazing headdress from the 1990 Broadway revival of the show Stardust. And what makes this headdress so amazing, and I know I wish I had pictures for you, but if you stick around to the end, I'll tell you how you can see these items once I get them in. Now, this headdress is the epitome of Art Deco because it was designed by Aweigh, one of the most well-known Art Deco designers and costumers during the turn of the century. And the reason that I got so excited, and I actually didn't know this until after I purchased this piece, because I don't know a whole lot about antique fashions or designers. I'm trying to learn more, but Aweigh I'd heard of. I was familiar with his beautiful Art Deco sketches, and if you Google, it's E-R-T-E with the, is it the accent grave? I need more French lessons for the accents, but if you look it up, you've seen his work. In any Art Deco book, you've seen his work. Very bright and beautiful, and he did a lot of costuming for, I believe it was like Gold Diggers of 29 or 39? He did a lot of costumes, but the one person that he created costumes for that blew my mind was an individual named Mata Hari. Now, for those of you who don't know who Mata Hari is, Mata Hari was a spy, a female spy, who would get her information through being pretty much an equivalent to a burlesque and belly dancer. She had very ornate metal costumes, just decked out with jewels and beading, and it's amazing. Again, I can't tell you all this history behind her because she has books written about her. That is how extreme her life was. And he designed some of her costumes. And why this was relevant to me is because when I was in high school, we had to do a book report on a significant figure in our lives. And I picked Mata Hari, and we had to dress up as this person. So I didn't wear like belly dancing outfits, but I wore a lot of, sequins and accessories. And basically she was a courtesan, an escort, and she would get information about the wars that were going on and all of these really heavy historical issues through enticing men. And I thought the fact that he designed her costumes just made me realize that, yes, this was something I was meant to have. Now, this headdress is a massive crescent moon on its side, and it has this beautiful, almost globe-like rhinestone crown hovering in the middle of it. It's massive. It's jeweled, it's sparkly, black and white, again, true Art Deco. And this came from the estate of Louise Westergaard. Now, she passed away in 2005, and she was a Broadway producer, nominated for several Tonys. Some of you listening might be familiar with some of the Broadway shows she produced. Her best known one was a musical revue called Sophisticated Ladies. And that was based on the music of Duke Ellington, which is fun because where my shop is in the alleyway, there's a beautiful mural of Duke Ellington that I get to see every time I leave. Now, in this production of Stardust, this was based on the 1927 song of the same name. And it's a jazz song that was composed by Hoagy Carmichael, which, if you're a music fan, that'll sound familiar. And the lyrics were by Mitchell Parrish. So from what I've read on the musical, and there's really not a lot of photos and documentation of the original 1987 review or the 1990 version. So I can only go off of little bits of information I've had. But it seemed like they built the musical around the inspiration from that song, but mainly the lyrics from Mitchell Parrish himself. Now, I remember this song because when I took voice lessons, one of the books I had to have for my classes was this massive book of called The Great American Songbook, and this was one of them in it. But if you want to hear this song, I highly recommend listening to the Nat King Cole version of it. Beautiful, beautiful song. And I'm so disappointed I can't find much information on the Broadway show itself. So if you're listening and you have any photos or documentation or anything involving either the 1987 or 1990 version of Stardust, please let me know, because Airte designed all the costumes. And this headdress was in the 1990 revival. And it's amazing because a lot of the items from Louise's estate, I think, when did they originally go up for auction? Because the provenance of this piece is listed in the actual items listings, but it also says where they originally came from. So with this one, it was originally sold in November of 2019 when the estate of Louise Westergaard first went up for auction. So a collector had bought this piece from the original auction, and as what happens a lot of times, a lot of collectors end up reselling it for one reason or another, whether they think the appreciation has gone up or they need to offload some pieces that are not as connected to whatever it is, it comes up, and that happens pretty often. But I thought this is such an amazing piece of Broadway history, and I wasn't originally going to necessarily bid on this one, but as I was ringing up customers, I saw that this one was in the last seconds of the bidding cycle, and the bidding on it was actually lower than what I would have thought a piece like this would have gone for, and I just instantaneously put down my top bid and ended up winning it. Very last minute. But it's the one that when I've shown some friends and family, this is the one that gets them the most excited. And I'm so excited to get it in and proud to have it. But it's not the one that makes me as giddy. And I'll tell you why in a moment. But just to give you another little idea of this headdress, it's 26.5 by 27.5 by 6.5 inches. So it's a really good size. And I'm assuming with other headdresses I have, it's pretty heavy. It's got good weight to it. But the headdress is embellished with iridescent glass beading, simulated pearls, and a simulated pearl crown. And I just can't be more excited. And that's something that I can't wait to get displayed, because that piece in particular, I have a specific area in the shop where I'm going to have it displayed along with its description so people can actually look at it. But like I said, this piece, it was between me and one other bidder, and we went back and forth a bunch of times, but I was more aiming to get the actual gowns and costumes from this Louise Westergaard estate, because they were magnificent. If you Google Erte Julien's auctions, you'll see the photos of all of these items, and a lot of them honestly went for, like, I think people got them for a steal. I know one of the gowns, I believe, went for $1,300, which is a lot, but in this realm, it's a steal, which I know that sounds very privileged, but when you get a lot of heavy hitters in these auctions, sometimes things tend to go for tens and thousands of dollars, even if you don't really think there's going to be much of a bidding war over it. It's interesting what sells for a lot and what doesn't. That's one thing that's always constantly surprised me. So now the second thing that I won is something that I had my eye on, and it doesn't, with this one, I had to figure out the provenance myself, which I love doing, but it gets extremely daunting because you never know for sure. And this is one that actually ended up selling for more than I even thought it would, because up until the very last minute, I was the only person bidding on it. So it just shows you a lot of people enact that strategy of trying to bid you up the last minute, which did happen here, but I think it was worth every penny. And this was a bra that was part of Debbie Reynolds' wardrobe at MGM. Now, if you don't know who Debbie Reynolds is, I just don't know what to tell you. I mean, her career spanned from the early 50s up until her death. And everybody probably most famously knows she is the mother of Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia, and both of them passed away within really hours of each other several years ago. But I remember Debbie Reynolds from Singing in the Rain, seeing it in the theaters when they would have classic movie festivals with my grandparents. My grandpa and grandma love jazz. They love music. They love classicals. And really anything Gene Kelly was in, I watched. So it's safe to say this was something that I just really wanted. And the fact that it was a bra. I am a huge lingerie collector, specifically vintage lingerie. And I thought, this is perfect. It hits the Hollywood provenance that I wanted. And it's also in the realm of lingerie, which is my ultimate collecting paradise. Now, the only information, there was no specific provenance that came with this. So where it came from, I really don't know. I don't believe it was in her original estate that had been auctioned off. She was really the mother of saving Hollywood memorabilia. She saved Marilyn Monroe's 7-Year Itch dress. She saved backup ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz. She became the titan of collecting movie and film memorabilia, specifically costumes, before it was even popular. I mean, could you imagine if she hadn't had the foresight to collect a lot of these pieces like she did? A lot of things the construction of a lot of these pieces, the history, we would never know of. And she has a tie to the last person whose auction item I won, which I'm excited to get into. And it might be, I don't know, the gossipy bit, but I love it. But anywho, it could have come at some point in time from her estate. She, because of financial issues, had to auction off pieces throughout the decades. So not everything was sold all at once, like what's common with estates of people of her caliber. A lot of them were sold privately here and there. So this could have at one point in time come from her. It could have come from the studio. I'm still looking into it. I know in the specific film I found out that this was worn in one of her estates at a Christie's auction years ago, I think back in 2009 or 2010, the costume that was worn with this item had gone up for auction. And I'll tell you how I connected the dots. Now, on this lingerie item, it's beat up. It's not in pristine condition. It was definitely worn and probably improperly stored. So any other person who doesn't collect anything like this would look at it and laugh at me for wanting it. But it's part of the mystery and the hunt that really gets me. Now, the photos I have of it are really good photos, and it's almost like a peachy satin material, and it's described as featuring a high neck with a racerback style straps and hook and eye closures, as well as 2 pads sewn into the cups. Now, there are 2 handwritten tags present on the interior. One reads MGM 52326, and the other reads 1584/9852/ Debbie Now, I knew these numbers had to mean some kind of code, especially within the MGM costume system. They had everything inventoried, especially if it was used in other films or productions. So I went on a hunt, hours scouring the internet for any information on any of the production codes that existed in the MGM studios. And I got my first lead on eBay, where there was someone a couple years ago who had come across a coat that he thought was worn by, oh gosh, who was it? I should have written this down. My memory just deceives me. But it was a big Hollywood actor at that time. And there were, Clark Gable. It was a coat from Clark Gable. That's right. And it had Clark Gable's name written on the tag, MGM, along with numbers that were very similar to mine. And someone had posted what the numbers meant, that they were directly correlated, especially the ones next to her name, with the film that they did and what scene it was in. So again, I go back to the internet and I scour and I write in all of the codes, what the item was, Debbie Reynolds, and eventually I find, and this goes back to seeing the estate auction she had earlier with items that sold, and there was a costume being offered up that had the identical numbers. So what I saw this as is this very much was the bra that more than likely went with that costume, as well as under maybe a couple of other costumes that would have properly fit with this bra. And so that film was one that she ended up doing right after Singin' in the Rain, which launched her career. Now, Singin' in the Rain was released in 1952, and the film that this bra came from was a lesser known one called I Love Marvin, and it was released in 1953, so hot off the heels of her success in Singin' in the Rain. And what was cool is Donald O'Connor, who was part of the Gene Kelly, Debbie Reynolds trio in Singin' in the Rain, and who is my favorite in Singin' in the Rain, doesn't get enough credit. He was in No Business Like Show Business with Marilyn Monroe and Ethel Merman. Amazing performer. Again, completely underrated. But this was a movie that they both starred in. And this bra, with the numbers matched up, was worn under a cheerleading outfit that she had worn in one sequence. And I believe in one of the dancing sequences, she also wore this bra when she was with Donald O'Connor. Because of the actual cut of some of the clothes she was wearing, it would have made more sense for her to wear this bra so no straps were showing, and it was a little bit more comfortable for her to wear when she would dance. So I thought that was really cool. And if you look it up, 1953, I Love Marvin, a really cool film, and some of the dance numbers and production numbers are really amazing. But it was fun to be able to tie that back. And there was another separate tag on there that said MGM 52326, which I was never fully able to figure out what that particular one meant. So I don't know if it was something that in the broader studio system meant something, if that was a number where it was used in another film. I'm not sure. I have no idea. So more research needs to be done on that, but it was still a lot of fun hunting for the exact provenance of that. All right, so the third and final thing I won, which to some may not seem like much, but to me meant the world, was a 1960s coat. And let me pull up the actual designer label. A Count Romy raincoat, beautiful Kelly green, that was worn and owned and came from the estate of Dame Elizabeth Taylor. Now, anybody who's known me since childhood or hears me talk about it, Elizabeth Taylor is my idol. There's Rita Hayworth, who's the namesake of my shop, but there's always been, and firstly will always be, Elizabeth Taylor. Now, I've seen all of her films. I've, as a child, read so many biographies on her. There's not much I don't know at this point. And again, she has just been my idol for as far back as I can remember, because a lot of people loved Marilyn Monroe, which I did too, but Elizabeth Taylor is a brunette. And as a kid, I just gravitated more towards her. I loved her in Cleopatra, Raintree County. I mean, oh my goodness. She's been in so many movies. If you grew up in the 90s and you saw the Flintstones movie, she played Wilma's mother. I mean, it just, again, just like with Debbie Reynolds, who also was in Halloween Town, if you need that point of reference. Their careers lasted so long that generations of people had seen their films. And I was always fascinated, especially with her love of fashion and her love of jewelry and accessories, which I have this massive coffee table book that goes through all of her jewelry items and collections, which has all been auctioned off and went for millions of dollars, rightfully so. But I remember telling teachers when they would ask me what my dream job was, it was to work for Elizabeth Taylor and polish her jewels. Like, I would have cleaned her toilets. That's how much I idolized Elizabeth Taylor, and still continue just to have so much reverence for her. And not just her acting career. I mean, even if you, like, I'm just trying to think of all the movies I've watched from her. She was in the Katharine Hepburn version of Little Women playing Amy. She was in one of my favorite films, Giant, which stars Rock Hudson and James Dean. She was very close to James Dean, saved the life of Montgomery Clift after he had a car accident, and 2 of his front teeth were knocked out and he was choking on them. She climbed into the wreck and dug his broken teeth out of his throat, thus saving his life. I mean, you go into that, but then also her activism, and especially in AIDS research, since some of her friends died from AIDS and the stigma around it. And she was really one of those celebrities that was at the forefront and getting people to pay attention to this deadly virus that, again, was highly stigmatized and taboo. And she forced people to stop and pay attention. She advocated for those who couldn't advocate for themselves. So, humanitarian philanthropist, amazing actress. I mean, there is nothing about this woman that I disliked. But the coolest part was the fact that I have now something of hers, her coat and jacket, and also something from Debbie Reynolds, which, if you are not into Hollywood history, don't know much about either of those two. Those two were actually friends. I mean, being in the MGM Hollywood system and studio system, you got to know a lot of these people. Now, from what I've read, Debbie Reynolds said that when she entered MGM studio system when she was 17, Elizabeth Taylor was already there, already a star, because she had starred in things like National Velvet and I believe Lassie Come Home. And they would go to school together on the lot and became friends. Well, as some of us who love Elizabeth Taylor know, she had a good amount of marriages. And when she was married to theatrical producer Mike Todd, Debbie Reynolds at the time was married to singer Eddie Fisher, who is the father of Carrie Fisher. And Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher did films together like Bundle of Joy, very much like cutesy family films, while Elizabeth Taylor, was known to be this big screen seductress, but also one who has a lot of talent and wasn't just sexualized, much like Marilyn Monroe was. So they all became friends. Mike Todd and Eddie Fisher were friends. They would go out to dinner together, go to parties together. Really cool photos of them, if you just Google them, pop up. Now, that all kind of changed in 1959 when Elizabeth Taylor's husband, Mike Todd, tragically died in a plane crash. Now, as one can imagine, you'd be devastated. And from everything I've read about her and their relationship, I am one of those that personally thought that had he lived, that marriage would have lasted, at the very least, a long time. Very much the caretaker of her. Just seemed... you just would have to look up photos of them. You could sense the love that they had for each other. So obviously she was devastated. And Debbie Reynolds had told her husband, Eddie Fisher, that she would stay home with the kids and he needed to go to Elizabeth and comfort her. And she's been quoted as saying she basically sent him right into her bed. Now, a lot of judgment can be placed here. It's really an interesting saga because this was the tabloid story for years. And Elizabeth Taylor, in all of her grief, I think really gravitated towards Eddie Fisher because he was there for her. But under no illusion, I think, was she ever really in love with him. I believe that she was just in so much pain. He made himself readily available. And so they started an affair. And eventually, Eddie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds got a divorce, which was very much against her religious upbringing. But it was interesting reading interviews with her decades after, and how Debbie Reynolds was always very upfront with, she's not the sex siren. She didn't particularly enjoy sex. It didn't interest her, and that was something that she knew was one of the reasons why Eddie Fisher strayed, because Elizabeth Taylor, if you read any biography on her, was very much a sexual person and very open about it. So they got divorced. Eddie Fisher and Elizabeth Taylor ended up getting married. Again, it was this big Hollywood rivalry, very similar to the Angelina Jolie, Brad Pitt, Jennifer Aniston love triangle. So remember how big that was if you lived through it? This was bigger, significantly bigger, and bigger than really anything right now. So you flash forward a little bit, and Elizabeth Taylor starts working on probably her most well-known film, Cleopatra, opposite Richard Burton. And for anybody who knows history about Elizabeth Taylor, she always said Mike Todd and Richard Burton were the two loves of her life. And with Richard Burton, they started this torrid affair, became more tabloid fodder, really embarrassed Eddie Fisher. It was kind of a perfect instance of karma on a lot of people saw on his part, because he was just eviscerated in the media because people were very much excited about Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor getting together and this torrid love affair they had. They got married. they got divorced. They married for a second time and became one of the most well-known love affairs in film history. But what I found really fascinating about all of this was it's something that both Elizabeth Taylor and Debbie Reynolds talked about a lot throughout the rest of their lives. And Debbie Reynolds, in 1983, when she was talking to the channel Biography, which I don't know if anybody remembers that or is old enough to remember that. But she openly talked about how her friendship with Elizabeth Taylor was worth way more than Eddie Fisher, and it was a common joke amongst them. And she was recorded as saying she never felt bitter about Elizabeth. And went on to say, "A man doesn't leave a woman for another woman unless he wants to go." She continued, when Mike Todd died, I sent Eddie to help Elizabeth. I don't think she ever really loved Eddie. He was an interim interest during her mourning period, which to me was very, very... Reynolds talked about a story about when they reconciled in 1966. Now, Elizabeth Taylor and Eddie Fisher were married from 1959 to 1964, and their divorce began pretty soon after she started filming with Richard Burton in 1963 while they were filming Cleopatra. Now, 3 years after that, in 1966, Debbie Reynolds and Elizabeth Taylor found themselves on the same cruise ship. And the story goes, according to Debbie Reynolds, we got on the same boat to go off to Europe, the Queen Elizabeth. And this was an interview she did with Vogue magazine. I sent a note to her, and she sent a note to me in passing, and then we had dinner together. She was married to Richard Burton by then. I had been remarried at that point, and we just said, let's call it a day. And we got smashed, and we had a great evening and stayed friends ever since. And that was true up until Elizabeth Taylor passed away. And Elizabeth Taylor passed in 2011, and it was said that she left some of her precious jewelry to Debbie Reynolds, just as a token of their friendship. But two of the other items that were up for sale that I desperately wanted, but actually the bid went higher than I expected because they were more contemporary pieces, even though they weren't really contemporary. To me, they were. But in 2000, they both ended up starring in a TV movie that was actually written by Debbie Reynolds' daughter, Carrie Fisher. Because, again, Carrie Fisher, it's not well known, but she was really an amazing screenwriter. I believe I had heard a story that she actually wrote all of Jamie Lee Curtis's part in the film My Girl, because Jamie Lee Curtis thought that Carrie Fisher could speak and write lines that resonated more with her. So go into it. It's really fascinating, the movies that she worked on. But they starred in this made-for-TV movie that also starred Hollywood legends Shirley MacLaine and Joan Collins. And Joan Collins had a film career that, gained steam, but she's most well known for portraying Alexis in Dynasty. And if you've come into my shop, one of my most popular coasters is one that has a picture of her face on it from Dynasty that says, "Not today, bitch." But the film was called These Old Broads, and Reynolds and Taylor both played women who reconciled a friendship after fighting over a man. Wait for it, named Freddie. But from what I was reading too, even decades after they had originally reconciled, it was said that Taylor had still been tearfully apologetic to Reynolds for the affair during the filming of this TV movie, and was quoted as saying to Debbie Reynolds, "I'm sorry for what I did to you with Eddie." And I guess Carrie Fisher and the daughter that Elizabeth Taylor and Mike Todd had said it really caught Debbie Reynolds off guard that Elizabeth was still emotional about it. But just to show how deep their friendship was, and this was a story I'd actually never heard of until I was recording this episode, that during the September 11th attacks in 2001 on New York City, Taylor was in New York City and was in a hotel and offered Debbie Reynolds refuge while she was there. So it's a really interesting story about this friendship that started on a Hollywood backlot at MGM and went through so much tabloid fodder, but they found their way back to each other in a friendship and even could joke about it. And you could tell just by interviews with both of them that I truly believe Elizabeth Taylor, being as sensitive as she was, really still felt guilty about it. And again, as Debbie Reynolds said, she was in a deep state of mourning. Because if you've read anything about her relationship with Mike Todd, they were deeply in love with each other. And again, I don't know what would have happened if they had still been married at the time she met Richard Burton. But kind of looking at Mike Todd and Richard Burton, they have similar statures and just kind of that older figure in her life that I think really held her steady. So it's extremely fascinating, but I just thought having these two pieces side by side and having that much history behind them really was amazing. And I didn't know at the time that I was going to get both those pieces. But to circle back, there were two other pieces in the Julien's auctions that were both costumes that Elizabeth Taylor wore in that movie, These Old Broads. One was this luxurious fur collared pantsuit and jacket, that beautiful lilac color, and another was the sparkly metallic thread caftan. And I desperately wanted those two, but they ended up going for a significant amount more than what even the estimates were, because they give what they view as to be the conservative estimate, and sometimes things fall short, and in this auction some things did, but with those two pieces they blew the expected winning bid. So it was an interesting day for sure, and I've kind of been walking on cloud nine since, because until I get them in my hands, I don't know if it's going to sink in yet that I have pieces from Broadway and Hollywood history, specifically from someone that I've idolized since I could watch films. And my only disappointment, and I was talking to my mom about this, is that both my grandparents who introduced me to all of these Hollywood films, to Turner Classic Movies, aren't both alive to see this and be able to see it for themselves. So that's my only disappointment, is that the two people that really got me into Hollywood films and musicals aren't alive to partake in my enjoyment of it. And just as a little side note, speaking of my grandparents, this is how much I love Hollywood and Broadway history. Before I went into high school, my family was moving into a new house that hadn't quite finished being built yet. So we ended up staying with my grandparents that summer, which it was crowded. You had 6 people trying to share one bathroom, and 2 of them were kids. I don't envy the adults in that situation. But during that summer, I ended up getting 3 of my wisdom teeth removed. And because I'm asthmatic, I wasn't able to be put under like a lot of people that I knew who had had that surgery. I was awake the entire time. So during the entire stretch of it, in my head, I was repeatedly singing the music from West Side Story, which top Hollywood film starring Natalie Wood, and also a top Broadway musical that has been revived. Just, it's fantastic, and it's one of my favorite musicals. Problematic, if you look into the Hollywood history of it, very problematic, but again, that can be for another episode. But I was repeatedly singing those songs in my head while I could hear my teeth cracking and being pulled out. It was horrible. But staying at my grandparents', I was in their den, which was my grandpa's office, that had this TV, all of his records, his awards. He was in the Chamber of Commerce, really a celebrated businessman. He was a travel agent during the glory days of travel. And so that's where I was staying, on this little pull-out couch, vintage pull-out couch. And I remember just watching West Side Story and TCM on replay while my face was swollen and puffy. It looked like I had golf balls in my cheeks. And my grandma would come in and check on me and bring me Jell-O. And that's just another fond memory I have of any time I would stay at my grandparents', if they weren't watching Larry King live, they were watching Turner Classic Movies and concerts or jazz concerts. And that became so instilled and ingrained in me that I remember big moments in my life were cushioned. The pain and hurt were cushioned by these movies. And when I say pain and hurt, I mean literally. I had a blood clot in my leg when I came back from a study abroad term in France. And because I was on estrogen-based birth control pills and the long flight, and added on their bleeding disorder that I only found out about later, I got a severe blood clot and was bedridden for a month until I could recover and could teach myself how to walk again. It was that bad. And I got through it and all of the horrific pain that came from it. I mean, I was on prescription meds that I would have to get every 4 hours. It was, again, horrible, the most painful experience of my life. And I got through it because I had Turner Classic Movies on 24/7. I didn't watch anything other than TCM. And I couldn't even tell you what the movies I watched. I watched them all. But that's just why these pieces meant so much to me, is because these were the stories and the people and the actors that got me through really tough times in my life, and that were introduced to me through two of the most important people in my life. But I digress. I'm not going to get too mushy. But this is why these pieces are so significant to me specifically. But being able to bring pieces of Hollywood and theater history to Fargo, a place where it's woefully undervalued, fashion, textiles, and history like that. I'm really proud to be able to bring it here and show people who care about it and just keep creating that community. But I won't have them in my hands until this week. And I'm hoping to get this episode the week I'm filming it out. But I'm beyond excited. And if you want to see these things as they are in person after I get them, I will be doing a Facebook Live where I'm going to show all of the pieces, talk about the history behind them, and you can actually see them. So if you're interested in doing that Facebook Live, it's through my shop page, Carmine and Hayworth Vintage on Facebook, or I will put a link to the live stream and event page in the description of this episode. So if you listen to this episode and you end up popping on the live stream and you have any questions, bring them. Or if you have any comments about this episode, bring them. I can't be more excited, and I'm getting a dry mouth because I'm so excited about it. But I hope to see you at that live stream. And if you want to see a repeat of it, I'm pretty sure if you go to our shop Facebook page, it'll be posted, the recording of the Facebook Live. But you can bet I'll be sharing these even on our Instagram, any of our social medias, because they will be part of our permanent archive, which we post online. But I thank you again. I wasn't meaning for this episode to be over an hour long, as it looks like at this point. But again, I just get really excited for history, especially Hollywood history. But I thank you for sticking with me this long. And I hope to see you, hear from you on our Facebook Live. If not, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and eventually you'll be able to catch a glimpse of these pieces, whether in photos or in person. But I thank you so much. It means a lot that you're listening to this episode specifically, because it's something very important to me, and I can't wait until next time. Thank you, and I hope you guys have an amazing week. Bye.